here today with Kate Nash, OBE, who is a change leader and a renowned disability campaigner. She's the founder of Purple Space, the world's only professional development membership hub for disability employee resource groups, and the annual Purple Light Up movement, hashtag Purple Light Up, marking the UN International Day of Disabled People. And landmarks which have been lit up include the Shard, John F. Kennedy Airport, Niagara Falls, and Sydney Harbour Bridge. Kate's worked for over 30 years to create long-term change for disabled people at work, and her new book is called Positively Purple, Build an Inclusive World Where People with Disabilities Flourish. So first of all, welcome to the show, Kate. It's really, really good to have you here.
Same. Lovely to meet you, Alison, and to be with your audience.
So we all want to know, firstly, about the title, Purple, the idea of purple space. Tell us what it's all about.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. So, why the colour purple when it comes to the community of people with disabilities? Well, we didn't invent it. I'd like to think that we did, but no, we didn't. And I have worked extensively throughout my career in supporting either legislators to improve the legislative or regulatory bedrock under which we include people with disabilities as citizens, or the employers community to ensure that they recruit and retain and develop disabled people. And it was actually a few years ago when the then UK government was choosing to launch what was called a Disability Confident initiative that they started to talk about the purple pound. So we've all heard about the grey or the silver pound that denotes supposedly the power of spend of older people, alluding to our grey or silver hair. Equally, we've heard of the pink pound, which is the ironic use of the word pink to call out the spending power of our LGBTQ plus colleagues and community and citizens. And so too was the colour purple was starting to become synonymous with people with disabilities. And when I wrote my first book, self-published, but Secrets and Big News, just a few years before that, we'd noticed that increasingly purple was being used by people with disabilities as part to denote our struggle, our joy, our celebration. It was synonymous with disability. And through the Purple Light Up and the work that we have done, I like to think that we have made that very famous. So it's about spirit, it's about unity, and a bit like the rainbow flag that is used so powerfully as a synonym, it's synonymous now with the gay movement. So too has the colour purple become synonymous with purple talent.
And that idea about using a colour in that way as a rallying call, as a source of pride. See what I did there? It's very much pride for the rainbow, but just using it to express something that actually words are less powerful at, are less immediate for. And also, the LGBTQ plus thing is actually quite a good example because it does get quite clunky, doesn't it? What's the next one you add on there? And disability is the same. And you talk in the book about this, actually. I think one of the problems with language is that we are frightened of saying the wrong thing. We're frightened of using the wrong words that we were used to one year are suddenly not appropriate the next year. And so there's a complexity around language which you completely bypass when you do something like light up Sydney Harbour Bridge purple.
Yeah, it's so true, Alison. It's so true. We know that all people of difference, we have our backstories, we have our challenges, our opportunities. And for people with disabilities, it's not an aspect necessarily of our humanity. It's not an aspect of us being human that we always celebrate. It can be quite a challenge for individuals to make sense of first their disability or their health condition, and then to navigate often an inhospitable world. And that inhospitability is often about barriers and lack of access, but it equally can be about what I would call other people's stuff, the soft bigotry of low expectations. So it means that disability, although there's a definition, there are legal definitions around the world, it's not a semantic that we run towards. And therefore, as you say, if we can use colour to cut through the fact that some of us will have, for different reasons and at different points in our life, a reticence
Mm.
in identifying with that community because there are aspects that are of struggle, that it just makes it easier. And it makes it easier for our allies, our purple allies,
Yeah.
enjoy too the celebration that it brings.
Yes, and you're right. There's a real nuance to, I know, to how disabled people respond even to that word, but also their own experience. Not just. I mean, it's like anything, isn't it? You try and paint a group with a single attitude or response or a way of looking at the world. It's just nonsense because each person is an individual, and frankly, each person can view the same situation differently depending on the time of day. And, so accepting that complexity is really an important part, and at the same time, accepting that there is a community there for whom you can advocate and with whom you can stand as an ally. So yes, it's a delicate balance, isn't it? It's interesting. You said about the
Fair enough.
backstory, and I think it would be really helpful and rich for listeners if you could just share a little bit of your own story with us.
Yes, of course. So, in terms of where am I now and whence I came, so I'm a woman in my late 50s. I currently live in Mumbles, just by the Gower Peninsula, South Wales. Although I have lived primarily in London, travelled and worked extensively around the world when it comes to advocating for the rights of people with disabilities, improving the quality and the texture of legislation and supporting employers to do differently and better. But that wonderful expression, the personal is political, it was ever thus. And for me, my backstory, I suppose, starts when I was 15, when I first acquired juvenile chronic arthritis, what was called Still's disease. It's a type of rheumatoid arthritis, and I acquired that very dramatically at 15. It's actually a disease that you wouldn't most normally get very, very young, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years old. So at 15, I actually got late onset juvenile chronic. And so, yes, at a sweep, it was very dramatic. It was over one holiday period, one summer holiday period, and I found myself in a lot of pain. I couldn't walk, I couldn't dress myself, I couldn't cut up food, I couldn't feed myself. Had to drop out of school. Went into long-term hospital care, and yeah, it was a challenge. Now I look back and I spot the depressed teenager. At that time, I was just trying to make sense of something that I prefer not to have had. And so, yeah, we navigate, we learn tricks and flicks in terms of how to build our confidence. I'm hugely grateful to great drug providers, legal drug providers, she said quickly, as well as great surgeons that have retained my mobility. But at that time, I was a young, um, very unhappy, wheelchair using teenager while at hospital, and then had to get back into schooling. And I tell often the story, I tell it in the book, I share it often in platforms. The moment I realised that life was going to be very difficult was a particular moment when my dear mum, my caveat, I share this story with her blessing, and thankfully at 83 I still have an incredible mum. She's been the wind beneath my sails and that of my siblings. But there was a moment at 15, I was at the kitchen table when she watched me. She watched me looking at newspapers back in the day when we predicted what job we wanted to have simply by looking at job adverts. And she watched me do this and she said, Kate, it would be fantastic if one day you could get a little job. And I railed against that word little. Your listeners will hear it. And I share this story not to belittle the expression that my mum offered. On the contrary, she gave me the stretch target in that sentence too. She put the word job in there when many, many others were not. So yeah, so that's my backstory, and it fueled me. It fueled me with anger, which is not an altogether brilliant uh, emotion. to
But
carry
it's
you.
catalytic, isn't it? It often is exactly what you need.
Yeah, it is. And it's common. Although I share my experience, disability, as we know, is a catch-all for many, many human experiences. The legal definition, it includes people who have dyslexia or dyspraxia or other forms of neurodiversity, people who are cancer survivors, people who may have MS, people who may have a lower back condition, people with visual impairments, people who are deaf or hard of hearing, people with facial disfigurements, people who may stammer. And although the manifestations of those disabilities, those health conditions, differ for all of us, and even those of us who share the same disability, it may be very different. The reality is the beat of our drum, our backstory, is often inelegant. Uh, uh, Systems, inaccessible environments, and other people's stuff.
Mm.
Yeah, other people's natural stuff. Because none of us, I choose very deliberately to believe in the good of people. We look out and beyond, and we can be challenged daily to accept that humans are innately good beasts. But I choose to believe very deliberately that we are. But we're often discombobulated
Mm.
when faced with disability, either of ourselves or of others. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. We feel sad. We feel disappointed. We do feel pity. You know, Pity is
So
one of the most corrosive of human
yeah.
emotions. Anyway, Ayada, Alison, I talk too
It's
much.
embarrassment often as well, isn't it? Just that sense of I don't want to say the wrong thing. I've no idea what your abilities and limits are, and I don't want to embarrass you. And there's if you're British, this is you almost die with embarrassment, and so it's easier not to speak and not to engage, and that's the problem, isn't it? So tell me more about what that means for people with disabilities at work. And I have to say, when you said that, when your mum said that thing about the little job, my heart just wrenched inside me. I was reading it, and I was just thinking, on the one hand, I can absolutely see where that was coming from. It's coming from a place of love and support and possibility. On the other hand, ow. So what is the landscape? I mean, again, we have to simplify massively because we'd never say anything, but generally, what are the issues that people with disabilities face, and what are the kind of, I guess, for people who want to be allies, what can we do?
Yeah, yeah. I think the kind of the challenges, the barriers, they fall into two camps. On the one hand, there are the policies, the practices, the procedures, um, the ways in which we can navigate the workplace. And different employers are at different stages of delivering high quality policy when it comes to include people of difference, people with disabilities. So much of our working life is predicated on the ability or not of an employer to deliver a really easy to use, visible, elegant workplace adjustment process, what's often called a reasonable adjustment process. And although there are some employers who are really getting it right in this space and putting boots on the ground to ensure that that policy is smart, that it is easy to use, that it's well known by line managers, that it comes with a service level agreement. So whether you need, I don't know, an ergonomic chair or an easy grip pen or a piece of software, that comes with a service level agreement, that no person would have to wait maybe more than 28 days. Um, and in the same way as maybe maternity leave is now just routinized. A woman just needs to offer up the fact that she'll need to take time out, 15 weeks before she takes leave. So too are employers starting to head the head of the game. But ultimately, that's still the biggest barrier. The other camp is the I suppose the more personal stuff, other people's lack of expectation, stigma, the embarrassment factor, and it's that often that can have sometimes not just as much as an impact on our life, but sometimes more because we carry that with us, and it can have an insidious impact on how we feel about ourselves, and it can have a low grade beat in terms of how valuable we see ourselves at work our levels of self-worth, our levels of confidence, our level of resilience, because there are so many. Some will choose to use the word microaggressions
Mm.
that are out there, it starts to suggest that the working world, is more inhospitable. So those are the two real barriers. In
Mm.
terms of what can allies do, I suppose be interested, be engaged, be prepared to lean in, be prepared to learn more. The concept of ally, I think, is fantastic. We see it a lot within the worlds of our LGBTQ plus colleagues, and indeed gender allies, BAME allies. Purple allies now are starting to really lean in, which is wonderful. And there are things that, yeah, purple lanyards, like rainbow lanyards, is a signal to the world that you're on a journey of wanting to learn and to make it easier for your disabled colleagues. But I particularly love the very genuine practical actions that people can do. And there are a number of things that people can do. One is to make it their business to learn what the workplace adjustment process is. Genuinely make it your business. So next time you have a direct report or a colleague that's struggling, you know where and how to signpost them.
Mm.
Two would be to tell stories about your life, with the permission of others, tell stories about colleagues. We all know somebody with a disability, even if we don't have a direct report or indeed a line manager. There'll be somebody in our loved circle with permission and generosity. We can share their story to call out the struggle that we might have. And then routinize it. Is it the midway review? Is it the annual review that you always say to every colleague, irrespective of how they present? We're a business that takes our diverse talent really seriously. And is there anything I can do as your line manager to make it easier for you to bring your authentic self to work? You don't even have to mention disability, but
Mm.
you can bet your bottom dollar that if somebody's struggling, they'll really hear that. Or if they're not struggling, they come across somebody else who is struggling, that have clocked that they work for an organisation. So just some thoughts there of some actions.
It's such a simple but powerful question, that, isn't it? Because it allows people to surface stuff that may be completely invisible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. It's all about that normalization. It's just
Yes.
saying this is a very common human experience. So let's get a wiggle on.
That should be the postscript. Right. Now you've read the book, get a wiggle on. Why?
Exactly.
I mean, the work that you do, campaigning, advocating, where does the book fit into that?
Oh, that's a great question. I suppose, where can I go with that? It's about, Positively Purple is autobiographical in nature. So it is the story of my life. And it's the story of my advocating slash campaigning life. But it's equally the story of Purple Space and
Mm.
Purple Light Up, the movement that I founded somewhat accidentally. Um, but it's chock full of lessons learnt and practical actions for employers and employees. And I suppose it's one of the stories that I needed to get out into the world. And there isn't too much practical information that people can try. So although it's primarily for employers, I'm hopeful that the book and the readers will be the best judge of this. There's things there for doctors, for social workers, for mums and dads, there'll be things there for siblings. There'll be things there for line managers. There'll be things there for policymakers, etc. So, yeah, it's my gift to the world. I hope it's enjoyed. There'll be things I expect people will enjoy, but there'll be equally things that people may rail against. Because we are complex
Mm.
beings, and we sometimes feel that challenge is created by one central force, and I don't believe that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, that's my best answer.
No, it's a great answer, and it's a really interesting demonstration as well of how you can use your lived experience to abstract lessons for other people and do so with the kind of humility to recognize that this is my lived experience, and there are things here that are really valuable for other people, and your experience may be different as well. I think holding that as you write is, which you do beautifully, is really important. You sometimes read books where somebody's lived experience is presented as the way things are, which I don't think is always terribly helpful. With the writing itself, how do you find writing? What does it do for you? Sort of the process of it, and also interesting, because obviously you have rheumatoid arthritis. What are the ways in which you engage with writing? What tools do you use?
Oh, great questions. I loved the process. I absolutely adored the process, and know that I need to write more. It was through the creation of Positively Purple that I know that my next, I suppose, potentially my swan song is to write more on this area. In terms of how, I suppose I live, I mean, it is partly a summation of my lived experience, but it's also because of my extensive network of people with disabilities around the world. Purple Space is a global network. So I'm equally talking to colleagues in Brazil, in India, in China, in Australia, in the Middle East, etc. So it's the story of our lives as much as it being a story of my life.
Mm.
In terms of how, yes, my hands are awkwardly shaped and I do experience significant pain. So certainly longhand has never been an option. It's not really an option for most people now. But nonetheless, I tend to write when my spirit is highest, which is in the morning. I tend to write for a good chunk of time and not edit at the same time. So just get into flow and not worry about the grammar and the spellings, of which there are many. And I pace myself. I sit with the knowledge that this story has to come out. So even if I can only do it in chunks of time, it will be there when I come back to it. And I suppose, like any writer, you have to get into that flow to really feel the emotionality of what you're writing. And depending on which, if you're writing something very practical for employers, or indeed something meaningful for people with disabilities to lean into, you have to get into a different type of headspace. So yeah,
Yes.
lots of breaks, being kind to myself, getting in flow, and not editing at the same time
Yeah,
as
very
writing.
wise. Yeah, and I love that thing about almost the trust you're saying there, that it will come. It doesn't have to be done in one session. You just keep chipping away and get the thing done because it matters and it will get done. I really, it's a lovely mindset, I think, to approach the enormous job, frankly, of writing a book with.
Yeah.
Now, I
Yes.
always ask I always ask my guests for their one best tip for somebody who hasn't yet perhaps written a business book, but is, thinking about it or just starting out. From your experience, Kate, what would you say?
I suppose the first would be answer the so what question early
Mm,
on. One of I so enjoyed working with Kogan Page, and they're wonderful individuals, and Chris Cudmore and his team are just breathtaking. But answering in a really pithy way the so what. Early as possible, to avoid too much of the rewriting and the redrafting. So, what I mean by that is to really feel what the audience might want to hear, find ways of delivering practical and engaging and head turning sort of sound bites and ideas about what people can do as a result of
mm,
listening to your truth. Because there's nothing worse than being where your passion is heightened, but there's actually nothing to do as a consequence.
mm,
Classically, in our world, we're often sharing our story to be told that we're inspired. Others are inspired. We jest that we're not here to be inspiration porn, and instead to invite back those who feel inspired to invite them to think about what they're inspired to do as a consequence. So I think for anyone writing, it's think about your audience and what they want to take away. So that would be my main piece of advice. Think about your audience.
And I'm nodding vigorously to the point where I'm actually going to damage my neck because my publishing company is called Practical Inspiration, and it's exactly that. It's like, yes, you want to be inspired, and what are you going to do about it? And how do you help people take that inspiration and turn it into something that you can actually action tomorrow, today, in their life, in their workplace? Yeah, brilliant. And I always also recommend people. I ask people to recommend a book, and you're not allowed to recommend Positively Purple. Sorry, but is there another book that you would recommend that people listening should read?
Oh, one of my many, many favourites, my pull-out favourite for the moment is The Promises of Giants by John
John
Amici.
Amici, yeah.
Yeah, a dear friend, fellow traveller in different aspects of human difference, but nonetheless, he chooses to use his story as an impetus to drive and support others to think about their leadership capabilities. So, yeah, The Promises of Giants is just wonderful. It's full of leadership lessons. It's not about positional hierarchy. He notices that each and every one of us as human beings have options and opportunities to exert and to spend our equity as leaders to drive change. And it's chock full of stories, beautiful, beautiful stories. One, he talks about his own mum. I suppose it really chimes with me. People who talk about their
Mm.
parents and their backstory. That he shares a story of where his mum asks him to think about whether he would know his soul in the dark, which is just, you've got to
It's a
read it to
beautiful
feel it. But
question. Yeah,
yeah, do you really understand yourself? And are you prepared to invest in your own personal development in order to be the best that you can be, in order to support others to think that? So that's my best favourite for the moment, The Promises of Giants by
that's a
John Amici.
great recommendation. Yeah, and he's a wonderful guy. Yeah. And Katie, if people want to find out more about you, more about Purple Space, the work that you do, where should they go?
To drop into our website, which is www.purplespace.org. There you can hear and see what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and how you might get involved, particularly Purple Light Up, if that movement calls to you. In terms of getting hold of the book, through Kogan Page, on lots of other sites, but of course that's my top favourite for the moment. And if you want to reach me on LinkedIn, I'm there, and on Twitter, Kate Nash OBE on Twitter, or My Purple Space. So yeah, come and say hi, come and get involved.
Loads of options there. Wonderful. Thank you. I'll put those links up on the show notes at extraordinaryprincessbooks.com, along with the transcript of the conversation. So thank you so much for your time today, Kate. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Pleasure. Thank you, Alison, so much.